Good evening, everyone. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation for July 2010. We have several non-routine and routine applications before us this evening, as well as a presentation at the end from our consultant's matrix. So why don't we begin the non-routine applications? I believe the first three are through our HR committee, chaired by Jim Campbell. And so, Jim, I turn it over to you.
The first item that I move, PW1, this is a transfer of $66,653 from fixed charges to regular salaries, again for DPW. I so move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion.
If I could, Mr. Chairman. The Department of Public Works came before the HR committee last Thursday to request three separate transfers, these first three items that you see here, from the salary adjustment account to regular salaries. And these are to fill three full-time positions: zoning inspector, chief engineer, and infiltration inspector. The BET had appropriated funds in the 2010-11 budget for each position, but transferred those funds out of regular salaries to a salary adjustment account to fix charges. So the first item that we have before us, PW1, is a proposed transfer of $66,653 to fill the zoning inspector position. Commissioner Amy Siebert was before us. She explained to the HR committee that this position had been vacant since the end of 2008, and that since that time, zoning and building permit complaint backlog has been steadily building, with over 1,100 active files, up over 20% since the position was vacated. The Commissioner emphasized that without this position filled, the Department would find it difficult to impossible to close active files and to meet its responsibilities in this area on a timely basis. Director of Planning and Zoning Diane Fox was also before the committee and stressed the importance of filling the position to allow the town to meet its responsibilities to address building and zoning permit issues. The committee voted 4-0 to approve the requested transfer of funds and recommends approval by the BET.
A discussion on this item. Let me say this is one of, I know it's all three of these items, but we had said from the beginning that all items or all positions that we placed into the fixed charges or their salaries as a result of the vacancy list during the budget deliberations would come forward as non-routine applications, so that everyone would understand what we were doing with the 17 positions. As everyone knows, we approved some for the town clerk's office as well as others, and so this is just further evidence of the HR committee's work with respect to those 17 vacant positions. Further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Mr. Campbell?
We're going to go through each one of these first. Yeah. PW2, a transfer of $80,639 from fixed charges to regular salaries for the position of chief engineer, and I so move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Campbell, second by Mr. Simon. Discussion. Mr. Campbell?
If I could. PW2 is a proposed transfer to fill the position of chief engineer. Again, Commissioner Siebert was before the committee, explained that this position has been vacant since December of 2008, when the then chief engineer filled the deputy commissioner position. DPW was requested to hold this position open as long as possible in the continuing effort to encourage savings in the town budget. But at this time, the commissioner believes that the department's workload has become really untenable without a full-time chief engineer to work on projects, both scheduled and unscheduled. The commissioner also noted to the committee that the engineering division has absorbed traffic engineering duties in the past 2 years, further burdening the division and keeping it from meeting all of its responsibilities on various capital projects. The committee voted 4-0 to approve the requested transfer of funds and recommends approval by the BET.
Further discussion on this item. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 12-0-0.
PW3 now comes before us, transfer of $56,261 from fixed charges to regular salaries for DPW, and I so move.
Moved by
Second.
Mr. Campbell, second by Mr. Simon. Discussion.
PW3 is a proposed transfer to fill the position of inflow and infiltration inspector. Commissioner Siebert explained to the committee that this has been vacant since September of 2009 of last year, when it was vacated as part of the early retirement incentive program. The commissioner reported that inspection team productivity has suffered as a result of the loss of this position, with only one inspector currently on staff instead of the previous two, so a reduction of 50%. With over 185 miles of sanitary sewer to inspect, she maintained that DPW needs two inspectors to keep up with its sewer inspection and maintenance program. The committee voted 4-0 to approve the requested transfer of funds and recommends approval by the BET.
Further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. 12-0-0. SC 11 now comes before us. Nancy Barton, Chairman. Mr. Norton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to participate in the discussion and the vote on this item, so I will take an adjournment for while you're considering this.
Okay, Mr. Norton, yes, thank you for reminding me. Just to let the minutes reflect that Mr. Norton left the room prior to the discussion of SE 11. And we'll wait for Mr. Norton, and then Ms. Barton, Chairman of our Law Committee, will address this matter.
He's taking a phone call.
Perfectly timed.
Very well timed.
Ms. Barton.
SE 11 is a proposed litigation settlement in the case of Bonita Jones against the Board of Education. It is an age discrimination case. The settlement had been approved quite some time ago by both the Law Committee and the Budget Committee. It's been on our agenda before and has been discussed at length. If anyone wants to discuss it further, we would need to go into executive session, but I think we've aired our views, and so I move that this settlement be approved.
Ms. Barton, do we have a number for this?
The proposed settlement is $300,000.
It's been moved by Ms. Barton,
Second.
second by Mr. Campbell. Discussion, and I would note or echo Ms. Barton's words that if there is going to be discussion on this item, especially on the merits, that we would need to go into executive session, but certainly Mr. Raymer.
I don't want to be the source of the executive session, so I'm going to note only that I intend to vote against this item.
Further comment? Mr. Kelly?
I also would not want to be the source of us going into executive session, since I think all our views have been aired, and I also intend to vote no on this item.
Further discussion? All those in favor of SE 11 in the amount of $300,000 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
3. Mr. Huffman?
4, I believe.
Looks like 4
Oh.
on each end.
Sorry, Mr. Finger. And then one abstention through, well, I guess it's a no vote with Mr. Norton abstaining from the discussion. So the vote would be 7-4, well, or 0 with one abstention. He wasn't here for the discussion. Okay. Ms. Bocchino, could you ask Mr. Norton to come back in? Thank you.
If his phone call is done.
If his call's still going on, he could stay out there.
You can stay out if he's still on the phone.
All right, that matter passes. I guess it's okay, as Mr. Norton works his way back in, SE1 now comes before us. Also Nancy Barton, Chairman of our Law Committee.
SE1 is a proposed litigation settlement in the case of DeGarmo versus the Town of Greenwich for $20,000, and I move that it be approved.
Moved by Ms. Barton,
Second.
second by Mr. Campbell. Discussion?
This is a litigation settlement involving a flooding claim, and the Law Committee voted 2-0 to support it. It did not go to the Budget Committee, as it's below the Budget Committee threshold for matters like this. The rationale for the settlement involves both the merits and the cost of defense, and we recommend that it be approved.
Further discussion? Ms. Narkington?
Yes, I'd like to move that we go into executive session on this one.
It's moved by Ms. Tarkington. Is there a second to go into executive session? Mr. Kelly seconds to go into execution. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, I'm going to ask if everyone could leave. Ms. Pochin, if you can turn off, if the wizard could turn off the TV cameras. SC1 now comes, or is before us. It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention? 12-0-0. PUR1 now comes before us. Art Norton, Chair of our Audit Committee.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The Audit Committee has considered this item at 3 of its meetings, the April, June, and July meetings, and we've discussed at length the request for $170,000 in the current fiscal year budget to modify and enhance the voicemail and VoIP system. Our concerns were extensive as to whether or not the recommendation included a technologically current system as opposed to simply an upgrade of a system that's 14 years old. We were advised by the purchasing department as well as the first selectman's office as the condition of the system is deteriorated to the point that it needs to have some remediation work done virtually immediately. And as a result of extensive discussions at our 3 meetings, we voted last Thursday to recommend that the full BET release the condition that we had inserted on it to have a report from us that going forward that the $170,000, we do recommend that it would be appropriated for an upgrade of the voicemail and VoIP system. Subsequent to that, the committee voted 4-0 to recommend that and work with the Selectman's office that we form a working group to address current technological advances and technological current conditions in the voicemail and telephone messaging system, because really what we're dealing with here is how we provide customer service to the residents of Greenwich who need to communicate with town employees. The audit committee is concerned about whether or not the systems that going forward will be that or the present technological situations, opportunities, conditions, and that we would like to have a working group with the Selectman's office to be able to address these issues so that in the future that we will have a system that meets all the current needs for both the town and the citizens of Greenwich.
It's been moved by Mr. Norton,
I will second that, Mr.
second by
Chairman.
Mr. Pellegrino. Further discussion? Mr. Kelly?
The vote in the audit committee was 3-1. I voted against the release of the conditions. I believe this is more status quo. We're just approving this, moving forward, without really any thought process as to why we have the voicemail system, what it provides, and is it really responsive to our customers, which is the general public. I mean, we were told that there were 7,000 voicemails left in the system in 1 month. I mean, these numbers were astounding to me, that this is a system that is not something that any one of us would put in our offices to utilize on a regular basis. I mean, I could see where if they came forward with a plan that said off hours we need a voicemail or something else, something creative, I'd have no problem. But I don't think any town resident who calls up the town wants to get voicemail. I mean, it's the last thing they want to get. They want somebody who will respond to them and give them an answer to a question if they can't find it up on a website. And I just think we're not, you know, we voted 4-0 to try to set up a committee to think through these issues. But I would just like to, I would rather just kill the system, let it die, let the voicemail system die, and really force the issue to come up with something that would be responsive to the community with respect to answering the phones, getting an answer out to the public, whether it's through computers, websites, BlackBerries. We talked about those issues and how some of the leadership has BlackBerries. We could probably provide those to certain key people that could respond. I'm so negative to this voicemail system that we're talking about 900, all these boxes we're going to provide, and throughout the whole town, everybody's going to have a voicemail system, a voice box. It's just, it's not what we should be doing as a town. We really need to have an overall plan as to how to be more responsive to the consumers. That's all.
Mr. Raymer.
I also serve on the audit committee, and I was one of the 3 votes in favor. It's worth my mentioning that I was very torn. I thought that Bill Kelly's comments were very much on the money, pardon the pun, and I was very intrigued with the possibility of, yes, let's let the system completely crash, so then there's nothing left for the town to do but to answer his damn phone, and then let's see exactly what happens. I do agree with Mr. Kelly that I think we ill-serve our public when we give every person in town hall a voicemail box which messages can be left instead of them actually having to speak to our public that we're supposed to be serving. And I don't think that was the right way to go. At the end of the day, I was concerned that it would do more harm than good with the collapse of the system. And so I was very much in favor of the concept of asking through John Crary that we start this process of trying to seriously look at what's going to be the alternative to this, but I was, in fact, prepared to fund the $170 to keep this miserable system alive, but hopefully for no longer than absolutely necessary.
Further discussion? Okay, this is simply a release of the conditions that we had placed on it. I would also note that we have a condition placed on a portion of the IT budget, and I think that's another avenue by which we may be able to have some discussion regarding this item. All those in favor of PUR1 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Just one? Abstention. 11-1-0.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Campbell.
I would like to move an item that is not on the agenda as a non-routine application. It's an item for which we all have a blue sheet before us that the Finance Department has prepared.
So you're
That
asking
item-
that we take up
I'm waiting for the procedure. So I'm asking that we take up item HR1.
It's been moved by Mr. Campbell to take up an item not on our agenda. It would require a 2/3 vote. It's been moved by Mr. Campbell, second by Mr. Mason. Discussion on taking the matter up. Mr. Raymer.
It's only a Freedom of Information inquiry. There's a posting requirement on our agenda. Does our 2/3 vote provision in our procedure skirt that requirement, or are we in breach of Freedom of Information requirements by taking an item up that was not on the published agenda?
No, if we obtain the 2/3 requirement to take a matter up that's not originally on an agenda, you may take it up. I am, as a chair, I've been very reluctant to do that. However, in this particular instance, I do not feel like any member of the public would be so interested in the MC raises of our employees. And I think from administrative standpoint, it's better that we do this now as opposed to wait till September.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raymer. Further discussion on taking the matter up? All those in favor of taking up HR1 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention, 12-0-0. Mr. Campbell, if you would present then HR1.
So HR1, Human Resources, this is a transfer of $170,058 from fixed charges to regular salaries. At the HR committee meeting on July 15, The committee reviewed the amended MC classification and salary schedule, the comp ratio grid, and the MC employees' performance evaluation individual rankings, all coming out of the Hay study. A lengthy discussion at the committee followed regarding the distribution of evaluations and of proposed salary increases, of performance ratings, of the rankings themselves, of SMART goals, of the Hay recommendations, the grading process, and the review process. So it was a very detailed discussion. In the current 10-11 budget, the BET budgeted funds for the MC employee salary increases in fixed charges. The recommended increases, after applying the comp ratio grid to the performance evaluations, totaled a little over $188,000, $188,953. And that would represent a 3% increase in the aggregate after a freeze on salaries the previous year for MC employees. The committee considered that and voted 4-0 to reduce the proposed increases by 10% and to approve a total salary increase effective July 1 of this year of $170,058, representing a 2.7% increase in the aggregate.
It's been moved by Mr. Campbell, second by Mr. Simon. Further discussion?
Can I have a question. Is there a range of increases? To Mr. Campbell or anybody else who can answer my question.
That's a yes, no question.
The answer is yes.
There is. The
Do
range.
all right, that's a good one. Could I,
The range.
just a little ballpark, 1%, 2%, 3%
The
range?
range is between 0 and 6%.
Great, thank you very much. That's all I wanted to know. Nothing else.
Thank you. I should also note, Ms. Barton and I have been working with the assessor and the comptroller who are off-cycle. This raise does not impact them, although they are MC employees, and that's because per charter, we retain or offer contracts of employment, or I should just say employment, January 1st of every year. We're looking to potentially amend that and actually bring them in line for a fiscal year, but we're working through that and in the hopes of just getting everybody on board with this cycle, but we'll keep you posted as we move that process along. So this increase does not impact our assessor or our comptroller. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention? 12-0-0. Thank you. Before we get into our routine applications, I had heard from a couple of you asking for some routine applications to be made non-routine. And so for the first one, let me call on Mr. Mason.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to move item CD1, Community Development, $199,720 from our routine application to our non-routine application.
Second by Ms. Barton, although I don't think I think we just do it as a matter of courtesy. Anybody who requests it, we just automatically accept that from any member. So let's just take that one up, and if there are any others, we'll take them up as they go. Also with us tonight is Princess Urfe, if we have any questions regarding this item, so thank you for being here.
I think you have to go down the order of the applications.
What's that?
I think you have to go down the order of the applications as they are on the agenda. And then if one wants to take it out and be non-routine, then you take it in the order that's on the agenda.
We could do it that way too. Are there any others that members would like to be taken out of non-routine or out of routine? I should also note that ED11 and ED12 are not necessarily properly before us. Those have been resolved by the Budget Committee.
Nancy?
Ms. Barton?
I would like PD1 to be discussed separately, not because I oppose it, but because it's a fairly significant expense, and I think we ought to have at least some level of discussion about it.
Okay.
I would join in that request.
Okay. Any others? Okay. So why don't we take up the routine applications first, and then we'll come back and take up these two afterwards as non-routine items. So with that, Mr. Clerk, if you could start with first the fiscal year 9-10 routine applications.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I wish to move FI2. This comes from the BET administration, and this is a request to transfer from the general fund contingency $75,000, other 401K match, to $75,000 to the workers' compensation and unemployment accounts.
Moved by Mr. Pellegrino, second by Mr. Mason. Discussion. Go ahead.
Okay. The next is EM2. This comes from EMOC, Emergency Operations Center. This is a request to transfer from the software rental $6,000 to professional fees.
Moved by Mr. Pellegrino, second by Mr. Mason.
And the third routine application from the fiscal year 2009-2010 is SE14. This comes from the First Selectman's Office. This is a request to transfer from office services $20,000 to professional fees.
Moved by Mr. Pellegrino,
Second.
second by Mr. Mason. Why don't we'll keep them separate, just because they're delineated here.
Okay.
All those in favor of the routine applications for fiscal year 09-10 FI2, EM2, and SE14 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. 12-0-0.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, that now brings us to fiscal year 2010-2011, and the first routine application there is PD2, from the Police Department, and this is a request for an approval to use $29,304 for the rental of 2 undercover vehicles.
Moved by Mr. Pellegrino,
Second.
second by Mr. Mason,
Okay.
and then
And finally, we have from HD1, the Health Department, the request to approval to use $61,030 for temporary salaries and Social Security.
okay, and that you have a revised blue sheet. Everyone should have that in front of them as well.
Okay.
Okay. Moved by Mr. Pellegrino, second by Mr. Mason. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. 12-0-0. Okay, so we return to PD1. I will call upon Mr. Mason as chairman of the Budget Committee.
Good evening. PD1 is an approval to use for the police department for $165,000 for a mobile crime scene lab and some of the other associated items that go along with it, and I so move that item.
Moved by Mr. Mason,
Second.
second by Mr. Simon. Discussion. Mr. Mason.
The police department has an asset forfeiture fund that is a running balance, and as the town settles some of the claims and some of the proceeds go into that fund, the police department seeks to, in a 80-page document that they sent us, replace the mobile crime scene lab. It's a very high-tech unit. It'll come with some training. The police department is replacing a unit that's in excess of 20 years old. It was a Board of Education vehicle before that, and then the police adapted it for this purpose. It's four-wheel drive, it's lettered, it's stenciled, it has all of the amenities to run, a long-term crime scene laboratory at a site. The police department came to us. This comes from our asset forfeiture fund, as I said, which is interesting in the fact that normally items like this don't get put in the CIP when we come out of this, because we feel we get a little different scrutiny on them, and the BET Budget Committee vote on this was 4-0 in favor of it.
Further discussion. Ms. Barton and then Mr. Raymer.
I'll go first, but not because I'm a lady. I was present at the Budget Committee meeting when this item was discussed, and I was favorably impressed with Chief Rydberg's description of what the vehicle is for and why it's needed. The sole reason that I asked that it be treated as a specific item instead of a routine item is because of the amount that's involved. It does come out of the asset forfeiture fund, which is a suitable use for a vehicle like this that we probably otherwise would not include in our CIP, and I support the application. I just thought it was worthy of discussion. Thank you.
Mr. Raymer.
I reflect, however, that I had some concerns. I think it's important when you have a very capable chief, like we have the privilege of having at this time, that one vest in them a lot of confidence for them to make judgments and lead you correctly. And I am respectful of the very fine chief that we have. However, in reviewing the items on this list, there were items that I thought that gave me some pause. I don't view this as being free money. Money that out of the asset forfeiture fund that we spend on this is money that's not available to us to spend on something else that may be an important project too. I know that the asset forfeiture fund is not, in fact, a fund that's supposed to be used in any way to spare the town what otherwise its general operating costs. It's meant to be for special capital items to enhance the quality of your police protection. And yet I feel to some extent that money that we spend not wisely out of the asset forfeiture fund can, in fact, be funds that are not available to us and thus have to be something that we have to separately reach into our own pocket to pay for if we feel that's appropriate. And with those things in mind, I expressed at the Budget Committee, I expressed here too, whether or not it really is worth $15,400 to this town for this vehicle to have four-wheel drive instead of two-wheel drive. Whether it's worthwhile for us to spend $8,400 that this vehicle be painted indigo blue rather than the standard white that it would have come if we hadn't paid the $8,400 for the special paint job. And these things did give me some pause. Now, once again, I still reflect back on the fact that I think we have a very fine chief and a very fine senior management, and I want to stand behind these people in the judgments that they make. And when push comes to shove, I will vote in favor of this item, but I wanted to do so in a setting in which I at least expressed concern about some of the items included in this item that I thought were perhaps more than we needed to spring for.
Thank you. Further discussion? All those in favor of PD1 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention? 12-0-0. CD1 now comes before us. Mr. Mason, Chairman of our Budget Committee.
This comes to us from Community Development. This is $199,720, approval to use, and I so move the item on behalf of the Budget Committee.
Moved by Mr. Mason.
Second.
Second by Mr. Simon. Discussion.
The Community Development Block Grant Program received an unexpected program income in the amount of $199,720 as a result of a repayment from a former CDBG sub-recipient who was not able to completely satisfy the terms. So the money has gone back to our CDBG. It's been repurposed through that group, through the Office of the First Selectman, now through us. It will be forwarded to the RTM. And if you look at your blue sheet, there's a list of projects that they're being applied to. This is a repurposing from the Diamond Hill appropriation that goes back about 4 years. When you accept revenues from CDBG, there are strings that go along with them. And I believe in this case, they would have had to have used the money for the intended purpose and for at least a period of 10 years. That wasn't the case here, so the money reverts back to CDBG for reallocation. And the Budget Committee went through the list of items on this, and our vote was 4-0 in favor of this item.
Further discussion? Ms. Barton.
Well, I will probably vote in favor of this. I'm curious about the process by which these individual projects were selected and how, if at all, the public was made aware that there was nearly $200,000 that could be distributed to deserving entities. And I'm hoping that Princess will be able to answer that question.
I will try to. Good evening. The committee, the Community Development Advisory Committee for planning for next year, what we did was we looked at the applications that came in this year for next year's funding, and we looked at what can be done this year. As a directive from HUD, they wanted us to appropriate the $199,720 to projects that can be started this year. So out of the 41 applications that we received, the committee, the full committee decided and picked the projects that can be started this year. Those are the only activities that we selected out of the 41. And in addition to that, the $3,000 allocations, there are three activities that have been allocated $3,000: the food bank program, Jewish Family Services, and the YWCA, the Domestic Abuse Services. The committee decided that they would appropriate this money, $3,000, to each of the public service activities this year because they were reduced funding for next year. The funding that they were recommended for next year has been reduced by that amount. That allocation will come to you during your September meeting. So it's totally separate from our annual funding. There is the only requirement from the HUD program is that we open a public comment period of no less than 30 days. What we did with the First Selectman's office is that we opened a public comment period June 14th, and it's open until October 20th, which is when the RTM votes on these items, and we will be holding a public hearing on July 26th, next Monday. You're welcome.
Further questions on CD1? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention? 12-0-0. Thank you. Okay. I think we are finished with item 2 on our agenda, the consideration of applications. Item 3 now comes before us, the assessor's report. Ted Courtney, Bob Shipman, our assistant town assessor, and Ted Courtney, our assessor. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You have my report. I'll be glad to answer any questions. 2 updates I'd like to give you. The first is that I reported 59 single-family sales through June 25th. There were 10 additional sales remaining or after the 25th, for a total of 69 single-family sales in the month of June. In addition to that, there were 13 condominium sales. The other item I'd like to update is that I was asked to give a presentation to the Byram Neighborhood Association a week from this evening, a repeat of the Round Hill Association presentation. And I was also asked to appear on the radio program Live in Greenwich Real Estate in November. I'll be glad to answer any other questions that you may have.
Mr. Norton.
Yes, Mr. Gwardney, when you appeared before the audit committee at its meeting last month, we had a discussion with you involving the differences that very often occur between what is on a request for proposal from the building department and the subsequent valuation once the job is completed. Could you advise us the discussions that you've had with the building department on this issue?
Yes, we met with the building department a couple of days after the committee meeting, and we had a rather long discussion about the differences of values between the Department of Assessment and the building permit values. We found that there are a number of reasons for these differences. We did offer to make the building department aware when we thought that there was significant underestimating of what the permit values might be. And we are now routinely having our appraisers, where the difference is very significant, make the building department aware of the difference.
Thank you.
Further discussion on the assessor's report?
Done with that? Can I ask a question? I mean,
Please.
we raised this issue, where people put in building permits ridiculously low and pay a low fee, and then the value of the work they did was much higher. So we suggested that the 2 departments talk. So you're doing your part. Is there a follow-through, or do we know, or is that something that's out of our purview? But Once they tell them of the undervaluation in the building permit application, will anything further happen? I guess is my question to
Anybody who listened?
anybody who listens to me, yeah.
Fair enough. I would think this would be yet one more thing that City View might be able to address, correct? Mr. Raymer.
I don't think that City View is going to be the solution to it. There is a process in place, as far as I understand, maybe Ms. Siebert can enlighten us, that in those instances in which the building permit fee was underpaid, was underestimated and underpaid, I believe there's a process in place by which the building department can claim the further payment and the revaluation from the building applicant. What I don't know, and what apparently Bill Kelly doesn't know, is whether or not there's any process budding by which that's going to be implemented. Do you happen to know, Ms. Siebert?
I would have to get with Bill Moore on that.
I mean, I'm my thanks to our assessor for taking the hint that was given to him at the audit committee, and I thank you for your promptness with that too. But the other side has to be accomplished at the same time, Ms. Siebert. If you could bring that to the attention of Mr. Marr, we'd be very grateful, because I think there is a considerable revenue issue involved at a time when, frankly, we could use the building department revenue stream, the building permit revenue stream.
Mr. Mynarski, our comptroller.
Working in a previous town, I had the opportunity to perform an internal audit on the building inspection department, namely the city of Stamford, to try to answer the question, and Bill Mark can correct me if it's not being done here. The building inspectors, and there's different ones for plumbing and air conditioning, et cetera, are supposed to possess the ability to determine if it's been overvalued, and they could simply do that by on-site inspections. So we should be relying on the expertise of the building inspectors when they do review the building permits.
Okay, well, clearly we're not going to get an answer to this tonight, and I didn't think we necessarily would. I'm not sure Mr. Kelly was expecting it tonight, but certainly our assessor knows about it, and maybe the audit committee can just simply follow up and make sure people understand what the question is and try to get some answers.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the reason on which I raised it is I wanted to, I know that a meeting had taken place between the assessor's office and the building department, and I wanted to know what the status of that was, and what, going forward, what type of report we can expect to address this issue, because we were very concerned last month when we met with the assessor about very often the difference between the valuation put on the building permit and the ultimate assessment subsequent to the completion of the work.
Sure. It sounds like, though, you received one side of the information, so I submit to you that maybe having the other side of that coin address the committee, and I think we can then have a report back. Further discussion on the assessor's report, Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, Mr. Gwartney, I just had a couple of questions about sort of items, what they mean in your administrative support and later is on the tax bills. Can you just, sort of explain to us what a state forester's report is? You file one with the OPM, and just give us a little bit of information on that. And also, what are pre-billing certificates? And again, you use that in terms of your administrative process, what you were doing in the past 30 days.
There are about 50 state reports that the assessor is required to file, one of which is a state forester report, where we do an update of the number of forest parcels that we have that are being specially assessed under the 490 provisions. In terms of I'm trying to remember. Give me again your.
I'm sorry. The second question comes under your point 5, tax bill file creations, and it talks about pre-billing certificates. What is a pre-billing certificate?
We have items that occur following the creation of the grand list when we actually print the grand list and the billing period. These have to be brought forward in the past by the assessing department. In the future, it's going to be by the tax collector so that they appear on the bills. And these are what are called pre-bill additions.
And you said this is changing. Is this change, how it's going to be done? Is this an internal process, or is this a change in what the state is requiring of assessors?
No, it's actually a munis function. In the past, the assessor had to bring these forward, and now we pass them over as they come up to the tax collector, and the tax collector adds them.
Thank you.
I just want to put a fine point on your comment, Ted, earlier about having, 59 residential sales. That's the most in any month since August of 2007. And I think that's of significant note. That's the other side of that one. Okay, is there, Ms. Barton?
Maybe we should get that question on the record. Are the sales values up or down? It's good to have more sales, but if what it's saying is that people are taking advantage of lower real estate prices, that is not necessarily the most favorable sign for the town.
Sales prices are down.
Compared to,
Well,
down from what?
they're compared to 2005, when we did our last grand list. The sales values are now below the 2005 level. The sales did increase in 2006 and 7, and then they started turning around in 8 and 9 and 10. And we're now below the level that they had been in 2005. This will have some downward effect on the 2010 grand list.
Okay. Is there a motion to accept the assessor's report?
Move.
Moved by Ms. Tarkington, second by Mr. Raymer. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention, 12-0-0. Thank you, gentlemen. Item 4 now comes before us, BET Committee Special Project Team Reports. You should have received many of them in your packet, and there were a few extras, I think, at your desk. Are there any questions regarding any of the BET Committee and Special Project Team reports? I'm going just to list them off for the public's information. The Audit Committee, the Downtown Report, Housing Report, Human Resources Committee Report, Investment Committee Report, Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee Report, Parking Transportation Report, the POCD PIC Report, Revaluation Team Report, and Town Properties Report. The goal by September will be to list all of our assignments on this sheet and then simply address those committees that have a report for that month. Obviously, not every committee will have a report every month. Some may be quarterly and some even annually. So with that, let me open it up. Mr. Pellegrino.
Mr. Chairman, members of the BET, I did put out an email late this afternoon. You may or may not have seen it, but just for the record, the Building Committee did meet on Wednesday, July the 7th. Mr. Alan Brown updated the committee on actions taken by the state of Connecticut to withdraw the con. Accordingly, the Building Committee decided to wind down all activities associated with Project Renew within the limits of the contracts in order to limit exposure of expenditures to the town. At present, we believe that we can expect total expenditures for Project Renew to come to approximately $2.3 million.
Further comment, Mr. Raymer.
Maybe it's an appropriate moment to say, because I don't know what's going to happen with Project Renew and when it's, or how, or if it's going to revive. But there's a lot of very good people spend a lot of very hard work putting together a lot of very interesting concepts on Project Renew. and I hope that it doesn't pass without our having said an expression of gratitude to the very hard work that these very fine people did. I hope that there's a resurrection of this project. I don't know that I supported the project that I saw in every single respect, but whether I liked every single part of it or not, I still am very respectful of the quality of work, the hard work, the effort that was made, and I wish those people were here in this room today for me to say thank you to them face to face.
Further comment on any of the reports, including Nathaniel Witherell report. I would also note, suffice it to say that at this point there had been a lot of discussion about tax credits and looking for certain types of bonds relating to Project Renew. All of that work is also on hold as a result of the state's decision. So, in effect, there will be no money spent on Project Renew, at least for the current calendar year. And we look forward to hearing from the board, Dave Ormsby, its chair, in the coming fall months as to where they're thinking they're going, and so that we can be on board and at least help facilitate a process so that we can make ultimately a decision on Nathaniel Witherell. Because as much as the state did not accept it at this point, something needs to be done with Nathaniel Witherell, and we're going to need to address that at some point. That being said, Ms. Barton.
I just have a question. My board package included only 2 of this list of reports. Were they all supposed to be circulated?
No, in fact, there are no reports. This is the beginning of what will be.
So you're putting together an overall list, and we're going to go through and, okay, so I have 2, and that's all there are. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think I sent my report perhaps to the wrong address with, is Elaine out on vacation, possibly? Just today. Well, I sent it to her this morning. So the HR committee report, you've largely heard in the items that have come before this board tonight.
The same is true for the law committee. My email was down all day, so I didn't send anything in until late this afternoon. So it'll come in the ordinary course.
Mr. Chairman?
Confession will be after the meeting. It's in the first selectman's office.
Mr. Chairman, the 2 committees that I chair, both the audit committee has not completed its report. It only met on Thursday morning for the whole morning. The investment committee did not meet during the month of July.
Mr. Tessie does charge for confession. Ms. Tarkington, is it a question about a report?
No, I just wanted for the record to say that I had submitted 2 reports, one for the revaluation team and the other for Nathaniel Witherell's the liaison report.
Yes, okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, let's move on. Item 5 now comes before us, the comptroller's report. Our comptroller, Mr. Mynarski. Good evening.
Good evening. A couple highlights of the Controller's report on page 1. We have tonight the presentation from Matrix Consulting Group. Later on this evening, we'll have a PowerPoint presentation. I've handed out copies of the PowerPoint presentation, and the only comments I received were from the Board of Education. You all have them before you. And to the right, as you look at them, you could see the responses from RH, which is Robin Haley, who will be presenting later on this evening. And when we do start up, if there's anybody in the audience that needs copies, just come up to the front desk here. Page 2, the insurance renewal. We had a very good insurance renewal. Franklin Company gave a presentation to the VET Audit Committee. We were under budget a couple $100,000. I don't have a final report because on page 2 you could see the 4 bullet points. The various policies are under review and haven't been purchased as of yet. I'll give you a final report in September with all the itemized listing of the renewals for each of the policies. Going to page 4, the cash flow report got disconnected from the Comptroller's report. The narrative is in the Comptroller's report and the reports before you. The highlight of the cash flow report was that we had a $28.3 million cash position per the cash flow report. I promised Moody's that we would have between $26 and $30 million, so we hit the mark. This is $28.3 million without the luxury of having advance payments. The tax bills were all late. and Steve, Chairman Walker will report on that, give you a status report. With the advance payments, we would have had as much as $30 million. So this is good news as far as the cash flow going from 12.2 to 28.3. We should have no problem with the AAA, with the Moody's when we go into January. It's the unwinding of the modified pay-as-you-go, and there's one more piece, which will be this year for 10-11. And finally, on page 6, I want to bring your attention to miscellaneous, the second paragraph, and I would like to personally congratulate Roland Geiger, my budget director, and Murray Wolzakowski, my chief accountant. As you can see, we were awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence again. This is a national award, and without Roland and Mary, we would have trouble getting this award each year. So I thank Roland and Mary. And I will now turn it over to anybody who has questions on the Comptroller's report.
Well, first, I don't think Mr. Mynarski did his entire department necessarily and himself a service in this recognition. We take it for granted that we receive this year in and year out. And if you could please all rise and join me in a moment of applaud for him. Thank you. I don't know if you wallpaper your office
Ran out
with
of wall
these,
space.
but I have the official Certificate of Achievement. I think that's wonderful, and thank you to your entire department for that. With that, questions on the Comptroller's report? Mr. Simon.
Two questions. On the bottom of page 5, so the OPEB Trust Board voted to move money from our Vanguard bond fund to the iShares and to the ETF.
Yes. The question is, $650,000 was split up into two
Right.
sections?
And according to the resolution that we passed, they recommend this to the investment committee, and the investment committee has to approve this before
No.
this occurs?
No, it was,
Within the
it's up,
guidelines.
I'm sorry.
It's within the guidelines.
Yes.
We
It's,
didn't give I don't recall that we gave the OPEB Trust Board any authority to do anything other than make recommendations to the investment committee. We could review that.
That was the discussion, and that was
His point is not target.
that was what was the discussion when it came back to us for the second review, and that is correct.
Right.
The OPEB trust is simply an advisory board to then make the recommendation through the Investment Advisory Committee to this body.
And this was a very big sticking point with the RTM, which is why I raised it today.
And the BET. But go ahead, Mr. Pellegrino.
If I can just comment, it's my understanding that there's been no action taken to date. There's been the decision by the OPEB trust to recommend this, but it still can come before the Investment Advisory Committee.
the answer is no action has been taken. However, we did have a lengthy discussion on this, and our impression, and Art Norton was with us, was that the BET has already given us discretion to do this.
My only point is that I believe the proper procedure is this should come before the Investment Advisory Committee. The Investment Advisory Committee should approve it, and then it does not need to come before the full BET, but at least the Investment Advisory Committee, which is the right body, actually makes the decision.
Okay, this, no harm, no foul. We just, the next
Right.
step is the BET Investment Committee.
Yeah.
So the report should read, voted to recommend,
Yes.
Sure, yes.
not to allocate. Then that's point one. I think it's very important because that was a big issue. 2, on page 6, under the middle, third item, RFP. Where are you with the RFP for the deferred?
At the last meeting, we promised and we gave you, personally, Mr. Simon, the opportunity to come in, and you came in and met with Jim Lavin and myself, and we made a number of edits, and subsequent to that meeting, Jim Lavin went on vacation for about a week and a half, and we are finished, and it's 2 steps. We're going to show the investment committee the edits, and at the same time forward it to the purchasing department. It will go out this week. You're referring to the RFP for
I am
different?
referring to that. I would just like to see a copy of what you So I sent in all these comments.
Yep.
You edited them, but I never saw what the final product was.
Jim had gone on vacation, got tied up with the MC match and a few other events, so.
I'm sympathetic to all that. I'm just, it's like
Okay.
a homework issue again. So if I could get a copy of what you finally produced.
Sure, yes.
Would be terrific.
Further comments? Also, Peter, we had discussed where we are with the retirement selection and contract.
The NEPC contract is in the law department.
Okay. So if you could move that process along, or ask the law department to move that process along. It's certainly been months. This process seems to have gone on and on and on, and I really would appreciate that item coming before us for September.
Okay.
Because I don't think there's any reason why it shouldn't come before us. I know it's the same company, but we spent a lot of time and energy and the retirement board did in getting out that RFP and then reviewing it, and we should enter into a contract that's updated.
All right, well, we did this like 2 months ago.
We didn't enter into the contract.
No, we made the decision like in May.
Yeah, but that process in of itself took forever,
Well, that's true.
and now I think we're at the stage where by September, certainly that's enough time to work out any issues in the contract. Further questions? Is there a motion to approve the comptroller's report?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Norton. Second by Mr. Pellegrino. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. Okay, 12-0-0. Treasurer's report now comes before us. Item 6, discussion.
Question?
Moved by Mr. Norton. Second by Mr. Pellegrino. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. 12-0-0. Item 7 now comes before us. Approval of BET meeting minutes for June 21st, 2010.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Mr. Pellegrino.
there's one word I would like to delete in the minutes. It's on page 2, the bottom of the first paragraph at the top. The second to last word is an adjective describing the BET full. That should be struck, and it should simply read, "and finally to the BET."
Is there any objection to that correction?
No.
Hearing none. Is there approval to accept the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Raymer, second by Mr. Norton. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. 12-0-0.
Abstention. I wasn't there.
Thank you.
They look fine.
12-0-1. 11-0-1. If you get a chance to see Ms. Barton's photographs, you should definitely take the opportunity.
Better
Where I
explain what
was
they
in
are.
June.
She too charges.
Yes, I do.
Item 8 now comes before us, officers' report. So
Trip somehow.
probably the first and most important aspect of my report will be an update on the status of the tax bills. So I am sure all of you have received calls or emails or some communications in one form or another asking where their tax bills are. One person from outside of Greenwich laughed at me by saying, I think in Greenwich is the only place where people are asking for their tax bills. But in any event, I can report to you that the tax collector's office has produced the following, and I'm simply reading an email that was sent to me earlier today upon my request for an update. And this is more for, hopefully for the public's information. It goes as follows. Business personal property bills were mailed July 15th. 25,000 motor vehicle bills were mailed on Friday, July 16th. Real estate bills are being mailed today, July 19th. Approximately 12,500 were completed as of 2:30 today. The balance of the motor vehicle and real estate bills that were not completed today will be mailed by noon tomorrow, Tuesday, July 20th. So all the bills should reach individuals by Wednesday, Thursday at the latest. And that's the current status. Obviously, there has been much conversation about this prior to even this issue. The BET was committed in terms of looking at the tax collector's office. And we will do that as well as look into this issue. It touches upon the assessor's office, it touches upon the IT department, and obviously the tax collector's office. So we will be looking to work with the administration into determining not only what went wrong, but more importantly, how we go about making sure that this doesn't happen again. As everyone knows, we had a minor delay also in our January bills this past January. So we're looking to correct that and make sure that this type of event doesn't occur in the future. We'll move on. We did already talk about the Certificate of Achievement, and congratulations once again to the Finance Department for that. Jim Campbell and I had the opportunity to meet with members of the Finance Department a couple of Fridays ago and met at length talking about our topics. And once again, we have a lot of items that come before us. You could just tonight we have the issue of building permits and whether or not they're undervalued in terms of what their the claim is for the work on property. And it seems like we talk a lot about these items, but we never completely close the loop. And so what I'm asking all of the chairmen to do is take the list of items that we've divided up, put them on your agendas over the next 12 months, the last half of this calendar year and the first half of the next calendar year, and make sure that these items are not only started and discussed, but then concluded in a report that's separate and apart from your meeting minutes. And we have Elaine Brown working with us, and I think the process will work well under the leadership of Jim Campbell. And so we look forward to that and working with all of the committee chairmen to make sure that we close loops on a lot of these items. Some of them are small, some of them are much larger, but at the end of the day, they're important to one citizen or another. I would also note that at this point, we are not going to meet in August. And so our August meeting at this point is canceled. We will then resume in September. We'll take it from there. Our agenda for September already looks fairly large, as it usually is. But there are a lot of some significant items that are we plan on addressing, including at that point, I believe, the fire department, at least an update as to where we are with that process. Meetings on that topic have been ongoing with the First Selectman's Office. There have been 2 meetings. BET representatives have been present, and we look forward to further ones in trying to figure out a solution to address not only the viewpoint of the RTM, but also the conditions that the BET placed on that appropriation. With that, item now comes before us. Old business, there is none. So item 10 now comes before us. And for that, we have our consultant who is going to provide us a PowerPoint presentation, and I will let our comptroller, Mr. Mynarski, start this process.
Okay, real quick history. We did an RFP for shared services between the town and the Board of Education, facilities management, and there was 2 responses to the RFPs, and we had an interview team consisting of Leslie Moriarty, Susan Chaporis, Art Norton, Jeff Raymer. Unfortunately, I believe Jeff had his operation at the time and couldn't participate in the selection process. And we ended up selecting Matrix Consultant Group out of Andover, Massachusetts. And I don't want to get too much into the report. The 2 lead principals on this assignment were Robin Haley, who's beside me and will be the presenter, and Susanna Lay. And what Robin did was he created a steering committee consisting of Jeff Raymer, Art Norton, Bob Lichtenfeld. I think Susan Chaporis was partially, she was interviewed at length and was part of the steering committee. They interviewed Sue Wallerstein, Leslie Moriarty was the other participant, and we had participation from John Crary, Amy Siebert, Al Manelli, and of course Al Cava, and a lot of the underlying people that put all the facilities management together. Now, at this point, I'd like to ask Roland Geiger is going to help with the presentation as far as operating it, and I don't know if Robin has a couple of opening comments. I would like to present you to the Board of Estimate and Taxation.
Are we going to project it here?
Robert, Roland, do you want to say anything to the VET or just go straight into the presentation?
Well, first of all, I would like to express my appreciation for, to be able to work with the town of Greenwich. All of our, I'm speaking for Susanna Lee and myself, all of our interactions were very enjoyable with both the Board of Education as well as the town. Everybody opened up and was very forthcoming, and all of our interactions were very pleasing. So thank you very much for allowing us to work with you. Now, one other thing I'd like to say while we're getting set up is, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, what your preference is, but I have no problem at all if any of you want to interrupt at any time for discussion.
Let me try to be a little more organized than that. This is yeah, I was going to say, with all of the, especially the attorneys on this board, why don't we go through the presentation, and then we'll have questions at the end. I think it should also be noted at this point, just for the public's interest in this topic, this is simply one more step in this process that we've been talking about for years. We've contracted with your group after an RFP process that went through. A steering committee was put together, and now we're here to listen to your report, and then we'll take your report, and then we have a much longer process to go to, but we're interested tonight in hearing what your group came up with after having met with the town and the various departments and the Board of Education.
Let me say, first of all, that this is a draft, and we're still amenable to incorporating any appropriate changes and edits. Let me go quickly through the approach. Point to you, or yeah, any. Okay.
And a microphone for you if you want to move.
Oh, my.
You want to speak off the side?
No, this is fine.
Well, you're going to have to face it.
Do you want me? Okay. I was looking here. Is this okay? Well, first of all, we just a very brief overview of our approach. What we did was we began, quite much like most of your consultants here, we conducted interviews with the management and staff of both the Board of Education as well as the town's facilities management staff. We also interviewed labor representatives from both of the labor groups, LIUNA and the Teamsters, and also, as I think was mentioned before, the former Board of Education Business Operations Manager was gracious enough to come in and share her views as well. We collected a lot of data, budget data, operational data that you'll see in just a moment from both the organizations. And we developed what we call a descriptive profile of operations for both the board as well as the town facilities management. The descriptive profile is nothing more than a simple kind of outline of what we think we know, or what we thought we knew at the time about both operations. It was a factual description. It was not an analytical document at all. It simply presented what we thought were the the right representation of the organizational structures, numbers of staff, amount of floor space that each is responsible for, budgets, a little bit about the labor, pay, the classification compensation systems for both LIUNA as well as for the Teamsters. We also developed what we call a best management practices document that compares the operations of the Board of Education and the town to a set of best management practices, and you will find that that is an attachment to the report at the end. We held a steering committee meeting to discuss all the preliminary findings and took back from that certain comments that we received both on the profile and the best management practices document and our preliminary findings as well. And we developed and distributed a draft report for your review and comment, and that's where we are right now in the process. I'd like to just start by saying that you're somewhat fortunate that you have had some historical cooperation between the town and the Board of Education. There's varying opinions as to how smoothly that transition has gone over the years, but we present this simply at this point just to say that you're fortunate that you have had this cooperation and that you go into this should the town elect to consolidate facilities management operations. You go into this at least with your eyes open, knowing what the advantages and the pitfalls are, which is more than we can say for some of our other clients. Okay. I don't want to dwell too much on this, but I want to point out a few things about the operational characteristics that you would have found in the profile, the descriptive profile. You see the area maintained by the Board of Education is roughly double that of the town. And then drifting down to the bottom, the budget is also roughly double that of the town for facilities maintenance and management. The board is somewhat more heavily invested in the custodial operations, which you would expect, having a lot more floor space. But one thing I do want to point out is the maintenance mechanics are even at 11. There are varying classifications of positions within that, but the square feet per mechanic that is maintained by the board is roughly double that of the town. And both of those are exceptionally high square feet or floor space maintained by each of the average mechanics. And just by way of comparison, we normally like to look at this ratio being somewhere in the range of 50 to 55,000 square feet per mechanic. You're seeing that's particularly in the Board of Education is well above that, and the town is certainly above that as well. And also, I also want to point out that our 55,000 kind of benchmark per mechanic is also based on an 8-hour day. Here, your mechanics are working a 7-hour day, which effectively makes those floor spaces even higher than they would appear here. So that's going to be a recurring theme. I want to just lay the groundwork here that we're going to keep coming back to that. Okay, please. Now, we got in the middle of this, and although our scope of services didn't require us to do this, we wanted to find out what some of the other, or whether there were some other instances that we could point to whereby the towns and the Board of Education had consolidated facilities management. Unfortunately, although I'm not going to tell you that it has not happened in Connecticut, we don't know of any, but we do know of 3 or 4 in Massachusetts, and we wanted to restrict this to New England. So we did find 3 or 4, as we said. We wanted to find out just in a quick phone interview. This is nothing in depth, but we wanted to find out what their issues were, how they dealt with cultural differences, organizational structure. How did they set this up? How do they govern this? How do they make sure that everybody's interests are seen to? And finally, we asked about labor relations and management. And here is a little bit of what we found. And keep in mind, as you're looking through this, that in a phone interview, you really are taking somebody's word for it. You don't know exactly how many, if they're telling you the right numbers for numbers of custodians or maintenance technicians, or even the total square footage maintained. But you can see that Greenwich is somewhat larger than any of the three in Massachusetts, Danvers, Lexington, and Needham, and is most comparable to Lexington, where but everybody, all four entities are well above what we would consider typical or normal numbers of amounts of square feet maintained per maintenance tech. Danvers and Needham organized their consolidated operations under the Department of Public Works, whereby the facilities managers and the employees became members of the Facilities Management Division of Public Works. But the town of Lexington opted to do something a little bit differently. They created a standalone department when they merged 3 years ago that reports dually to the school superintendent and the town manager. So that although the management and supervisory staff are departmental employees, the maintenance and custodial employees remained employees of their original organizations. The consolidated entities within those three organizations created several systems to make sure that their customers' needs were met. There's a dual reporting and supervisory relationship in certain of them between the facilities managers and custodial staff, meaning that the custodial staff not only report to their home Department of Public Works, but also to the facilities manager, typically the principal of a school. There's also a formal process for requesting and assigning work, of course, and they merged and utilized a single management information system to prioritize and monitor the work. And importantly, they communicate. They have status updates and reports to the facilities managers on work orders, as well as having routine meetings to discuss any kind of issues that they may have. And a little tagline down at the bottom, mainly because we brought it up originally about establishing an internal service fund. None of the facilities maintenance operations that we interviewed over the phone operates this as an internal service fund, meaning that they operate on a kind of a business process by which they break even. They charge their users for the preventive and routine maintenance that they do, and ensure that they break even on a business basis at the end of the year. None of them does that, although that is one of the best management practices that we see around the country. But it just didn't happen, didn't unfortunately happen within the organizations that we looked at. Now, we looked at varying degrees of consolidation. If you've read the report, you'll see that we go through a little bit of a dialectic process to look at varying degrees of consolidation. One is the status quo, meaning let's not change anything. The second is a bit of a hybrid, whereby the department or the town and the Board of Education remain separate entities, but share certain services like tools and equipment, joint procurement, et cetera. And finally, we investigated the advantages and disadvantages of full consolidation between the board and the town. And we came down on the side of full consolidation should the town go forward with this, because it maximizes the number of advantages, meaning that there's opportunities for a single directorate that deploys staff and that has the flexibility of deploying staff, both custodial as well as maintenance, where they're needed. There could be a single set of inspections, capital project management, et cetera, on and on, that we believe that should you consolidate, we believe that full consolidation is the best of the three alternatives that we looked at. And should the two facilities organizations consolidate, we recommend that it be placed under the Department of Public Works, the Facilities Division. Because, and there's several reasons, but as we said before, there is a history of that consolidated organization within the town, and it certainly is the most common model of consolidation in the three entities that we looked at in the comparative survey. Okay. Now, we provide two alternative organizational models in the report. The first one, importantly, looks at trying to maximize the cost savings. We'll get more into that, but we didn't find a lot of opportunity there, frankly. But the second was sort of an outgrowth of the findings of the first. In as much as we didn't find a lot of opportunities for cost savings, we looked therefore at the second alternative, at a model that maximizes services. Now, as I foreshadowed on the previous slide, cost savings don't appear to be available on a large scale through consolidation, frankly. And there's several reasons for this. Number one, as I mentioned, that we come back to, you're staffed thinly. And one of the primary ways that you know that is because of the very high ratios of floor space maintained by mechanics currently. And you're certainly not overspending on custodial operations. As we saw, the Board of Education is averaging about $1 per square foot for custodial operations, whereas the town, maintaining a lot less floor space, is about at $1.79 per square foot. Both of those are very, very reasonable numbers. A second, and just a little parenthetical note about the large areas maintained by mechanics at both the Board of Education as well as the town, is that likely these ratios are resulting in prohibiting the accomplishment of necessary preventive maintenance, which is a longer term issue for both the town and the board. And in our interviews, it became obvious that it's got to be no more than 10 to 15% in either of the organization's time spent by mechanics is being expended in the preventive maintenance area. A second factor in the inability to squeeze more cost savings out of this potential consolidation is the relatively large spans of control of the maintenance functions by the supervisory staff. You've got maintenance spans of control ratios of anywhere from 8 to 1 to 13 to 1 for your supervisors, and there aren't many of them, and those are and the ones of them that there are holding down multiple tasks themselves. They have direct line responsibilities as well as supervisory responsibilities. Custodial operations, just as an example, in the board are managed by the building operations supervisor, who also oversees maintenance and repair at the Greenwich High School. So, and finally, there aren't a lot of ways to squeeze out savings in the administrative areas because you're very thinly staffed there. In the town, by way of illustration, there's only a half-time administrative assistant, and in the relatively larger Board of Education, there are only 2 full-time administrative and clerical positions. So again, not a lot of ways to squeeze out savings there. So a bit about the 2 alternatives. We'll start with the first one. Under both organizational alternatives that we looked at, should you go forward with this, we recommend the consolidation of custodial as well as maintenance operations under single managers. That's to ensure consistency in training and the standardization of services, and importantly, the flexibility of deploying staff where they need to go. Also, in alternative 1, we recommend that custodial operations be placed under a building operations supervisor, with the maintenance operations under the building construction and maintenance supervisor. Kind of one of the the mechanics of how this would work is trying to ensure proper supervision as well as addressing what we would really have to characterize as sort of a chronic situation at the high school, where you've got something like 152,000 square feet per the three mechanics that are currently there. We wanted to, we recommend that you transfer the board's trades foreman that's currently over elementary and middle schools maintenance over to the high school and make that individual a working foreman, thereby abating somewhat what I've characterized as a chronic situation with a very large floor space at the high school. That still only gets the floor space down to about 113,000 square feet per mechanic, even assuming that the working foreman is truly working throughout the day as opposed to providing supervisory responsibilities. But this would retain nominal supervision by the trades foreman over the 6 building maintenance mechanics and 2 instrumentation mechanics that are currently at the elementary schools and middle schools. So the large existing spans of control under Alternative 1, as well as the relatively thin staff, both from a supervisory, administrative, and hands-on mechanic and custodial staff, it really prohibits a lot of cost savings here, other than the elimination of, we call it one of the director positions. It's either the director or the superintendent position. So, under Alternative 2, our clear directive here was to try to save cost. It became clear that there weren't a lot of cost savings to be had. So what we wanted to do is provide at least another organizational model to which the town should strive in the longer term, that maximizes services and provides you with a more effective organization. We, as we said, we believe there are some operational issues that you really need to address, at least in the longer term. So we developed this organizational alternative that strives to increase these service levels. So we hope that you'll consider this, at least in the longer term, to strive toward this model. We understand that the immediate directive is to minimize cost, but we do believe, in our professional opinion, that this should be addressed longer term. As we said, the floor space ratios, particularly at the Board of Education, are high and around 140,000 square feet per mechanic. Longer term, we recommend that ratio be reduced or abated somewhat, at least, by the hiring of 4 additional building maintenance mechanics who would be deployed primarily at the schools to reduce that effective ratio to about 100,000 to 1. That being said, we understand that under a consolidated operation, the director would have the flexibility of deploying those staff wherever they're needed. But certainly our recommendation would be to deploy them as their home base at the school. Cost about $321,000, but it should result in at least greater levels of effort in the preventive maintenance areas. If you'll recall, Alternative 1 left the Board of Education maintenance operations under the supervision of a single trades foreman, although that trades foreman had nominal responsibilities for supervising all of the maintenance staff. That individual would be based at the high school. We did recommend that it be a working foreman, but that in itself, in addition to the fact that it would not be proximate to all of the maintenance staff, that would limit the individual's supervisory efforts. So that would likely result in the building construction and maintenance supervisor, who is that trades foreman's direct supervisor, effectively supervising the elementary school and middle school mechanic personnel, thus limiting the effectiveness of the recommendation to begin with. So we recommend the addition of another trades foreman position to oversee the staff at the elementary schools and middle school mechanic personnel at a cost of what we believe might be around $100,000, including salary and benefits, by the way. All of these figures include salary and benefits. Other recommendations, longer term, we would recommend that you hire an engineer to centralize the project management, oversight of design, construction bid process, and financial reporting, and hire a facilities inspector to continually inspect town and board facilities at approximately $80,000. A few kind of ancillary recommendations that we do go into some detail in the report on. We think that placing the head custodians in the schools when the bulk of the work is being accomplished would be a beneficial thing to everyone. It gives a greater level of supervision over the work as it's being accomplished, and ensuring quality assurance checks as they are happening and performed by each shift. Clearly, this is a change in working conditions. So there may have to be some negotiation, certainly would, with the Teamsters, as it would represent not only a change in working conditions, but also a change in working hours. But we also recommend that you conduct facilities inspections in a more standardized manner. This is one element that we believe is fairly strong in both areas, in both the town and the board, and that each of the organizations could benefit from the positives, advantages presented by the other. The board has the tools for schools walkthroughs and reports to the state on indoor air quality. The board also contracts for a structural inspection of all its facilities every 5 years. That would be a good opportunity to capitalize on that with the town every 5 years. And the town has developed a facilities indexing system that appears to be working well, and that could be exported as well to the Board of Education, we believe. In summary, I'll just say that if the sole criterion for making the determination as to whether or not consolidation of facilities maintenance and management between the Board of Education and the town makes sense is cost savings, if that is your sole criterion, we'd have to recommend against it at this time because there just simply aren't the cost savings available without stressing the spans of control further. And you've also got the situation with the maintenance staff being stretched to the limit. We can't, in good conscience, make a recommendation for cutting staff, which is where typically we find the greatest opportunity to squeeze cost savings. So we recommend that if that is the sole criterion, that you not do it at this time. However, with that said, if we can take this in a little bit more of a broader context, there are some advantages to consolidation beyond the cost savings. And we've gone through some of those, but certainly standardizing your information system would be one. Standardizing the building inspections and the resulting single set of priorities and the capital management and training and capital project reporting would be standardized. There would also be a more equitable distribution of resources with the decision being made by a single director or a single supervisor on a daily basis. And in summary, those are our recommendations. I'll be happy to take your questions.
Well, thank you for that report. I'll open it up for discussion or comments and questions, and then we'll talk about process. As I indicated earlier, this is just one more step in what has been a multi-year process, and the work is yet to be completed. The expectation would be that we would take this report at the end of tonight. Consultant would take back any questions or comments, both in writing and/or that are presented here tonight, issue a final report, and then that report would be then taken up by a committee to then make a recommendation, hopefully by year's end, because if there are to be any changes, those changes would have to be reviewed by the Budget Committee during their deliberations in February, and so we're trying to keep this off that cycle so as to not have this issue come up in February. So with that, I want to open up Mr. Mason, and then Mr. Raymer, and then Mr. Norton, then I'll come back down to this side.
Thank you very, very much for coming. Fantastic presentation. I think you made mention, and I want to drive this a little bit further. If we aren't doing enough preventative maintenance, that would determine the cost benefit for the future. You said, about the overall savings, not being able to necessarily go after it for that reason. The town in the last 10 years has replaced 2 elementary school buildings, has at least 1 or 2 more that probably could be a complete replacement. There's an auditorium music section of the town we call it our MISA project, that's in need of overhaul. I think the town over a long period of time has not had a good process of deciding how we're going to get to these projects. So I think the real cost benefit for this is if we can save the taxpayers from 1 replacement school building of $30 million, you're adding up 4 building maintenance mechanics is relatively not even a noticeable number. I think that's where we need to go, where we've had buildings in the town that we just haven't gotten to them, or we've let them, because of maybe the scope of what the building offers or what we wanted to offer in a building, we've let those buildings just kind of almost go into disrepair to force the issue. One example of that might be our Hamilton Avenue Elementary School. Another might have been the town had our Glenville Elementary School. There was always a question from the day that it was built: was it the proper design for the application? It didn't have windows. It had open classrooms. There were some issues there. So with that being said, I think the real benefit to the town is that by maintaining the buildings on a standard schedule, if we could get ourselves in a position where we're not doing these major renovations over time, that will be a huge cost savings to the taxpayer.
I couldn't say it any better, obviously. It's the same issue that we see with fleet management as well. $1 put into preventive maintenance to maintain your fleet returns $2 typically within 5 to 10 years. So,
Mr. Raymer.
There's one point of mild disappointment or dissatisfaction that I experienced as a member of the steering committee that I think I ought to share, to articulate. Certainly had a good experience with Mr. Haley and with Matrix Group, and certainly had a good experience with the members of the steering committee that I thought was a very strong group. I think it was a mistake for us to come forward with a draft report without meeting at least one more time with the steering committee. I feel that there was some unresolved areas of input that was a dialogue and process, and I want to be careful to be sure that we don't leave any sectors, school board or whatever it might have been, with areas of disappointment that they feel that there were things that they could have vetted with a consultant or things they could have brought to bear. And I think it was our expectation, certainly it was my expectation as a steering committee, that we were going to meet one further time before the draft was generated. And I did have the sense from some memoranda that I saw circulated that there was some surprise also on the school board side that the draft report was issued. I understand the timing issue. None of us wanted to have an August meeting. It would painful to kick this matter over to the fall. None of that is desirable. I think there was some strong wish by our chair to get this process out there so the public can begin to give this some consideration. There was a fairly lively dialogue between me and the chair. I thank the chair for its patience in listening to my diatribe on the subject. But as we move forward with it, I want to be careful to be sure that there is an appropriate level of input from the steering committee working with this very capable consultant. I most particularly want to be sure that the concerns, the very vibrant concerns that I was beginning to hear from the school board people, to be sure that they're properly brought forward and considered, because I'm not sure that that opportunity has taken place at this point.
if I could respond. One thing I do want to say is it was a bit unusual for us, I mean, to issue the draft report to the client prior to the next round of review by either the steering committee and the staff. Having said that, I received from Peter, actually yesterday morning, as I was sitting at my desk yesterday morning, I got an email that sent me the comments from the Board of Education, and I felt strongly enough that we addressed those that I sat there and did that yesterday morning and emailed those back to Peter, and hopefully those comments got distributed. I apologize if there was any kind of misstep there, but I do want you to know that I take every comment seriously.
Thank you.
And would respond to each.
Mr. Norton.
Yes, Robin, I have 2 points I'd like to make. I'm going to refer to this report. The first one is on page 11, and which in the second arrow you say, likely these ratios are prohibiting the accomplishment of
slides?
Slides
Yes.
or the
No,
Page 11.
of the
of the
report?
report itself, right?
No, he's
Or the-
looking
No,
at a
the
slide.
Oh,
I
it must be
can
the
see it.
slide. Okay.
The second arrow, actually, it's, to a certain extent, it's a follow-up on Mike Mason's question and point, but with this bullet point that you have here, was there any analysis or quantification of what this would represent? I mean, you further go on to adding certain mechanics, but at this point in time, where you have identified here is likely these ratios are prohibiting the accomplishment of necessary preventive maintenance. Was there any analytical work done to support this statement?
Well, first of all, this was a consolidation feasibility study, so we didn't really delve into that type of data. But what we did do is we during our interview process, asked for any substantiation of the numbers or the numbers of work orders as a percentage of the total that were represented by preventive maintenance. And, geez, I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, so I may be giving you the wrong information here. The exact numbers, I'm not sure. But it seems to me that about 7 to 10% of the total numbers of work orders in the town, at least, were preventive maintenance work orders. And that's let me place that in context. Typically, what we'll see in very well-functioning facilities maintenance and management organizations, and keep in mind, I'm not trying to compare you to Maricopa County, Arizona, where is probably the best facilities management operation I've ever seen. But in those well-managed operations, typically between 40 and 50% of the total mechanic time will be spent in what can be generally classified as preventive maintenance.
So that the statement here doesn't specifically relate to your subsequent recommendations in regard to adding certain mechanics.
I'm sorry, can you?
Now, the statement here does not reference subsequent statements regarding, in the various alternatives, adding certain mechanics, adding additional mechanics.
Certainly, it's our recommendation to add those 4 mechanics, and there's nothing magic about the number 4, but certainly the recommendation, in a general sense, to add building maintenance mechanics is a direct outgrowth of our observations about preventive maintenance.
Okay, on page 19, the last arrow you have, more equitable distribution of resources, particularly in maintenance areas covered. Is this addressing procurements and inventory controls?
That's not what I had in mind when I put this bullet point together. What was behind this particular bullet point, that's not to obviate any of the other advantages, such as you mentioned, in procurement and others. But what was behind my thought here was that, given that, if you'll recall, one of the early slides that we showed was the relative differences in the amounts of floor space covered by the town building mechanics versus those in the board. Under a single directorate, the supervisors, under the direction of a single manager, a superintendent or director, would have the ability to place these building mechanics in areas where they're needed. So therefore, there would be a more equitable distribution. Right now, there's a wall. I can't move town building mechanics over to the board without, well, I just don't think I could to begin with.
Thank you.
All right.
Further question or dialogue, just so that Mr. Simon and then Mr. Kelly, just so that everybody listening in on Channel 79 this evening, we have with us certainly members of the town building and maintenance department, as well as the Board of Education. We have the town administrator here, and certainly I would be remiss if I didn't mention the esteemed former member of the RTM, Donald Landsman. Thank you for attending. With that, Mr. Simon and then Mr. Kelly.
Go after Mr. Kelly.
I just want to understand this. 69,000 square feet that the town maintains per mechanic, and then the 137,000 that the Board of Ed maintains per mechanic. You indicated page 56 of your report that in order to get to the number of 50,000 to 60,000 square feet per mechanic would be hiring 16 to 24 more mechanics. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you mentioned that Maricopa County in Arizona.
That's where Phoenix is. Mhm.
And they have such a system or such a ratio?
Oh, yes. I might add a recommendation. No, I do not.
You recommended 4 maintenance mechanics, which, according to my very rough calculations, would bring us to about 85,000 per maintenance mechanic. Is that right?
Yeah, if you say, I didn't calculate it that way. And again, there's no magic to the number 4, but what?
That's my next question. Was there magic?
No, there is not. But here's, I mean, the only rationale there was that we could get the schools, the elementary, middle, and high schools floor space per mechanic down to a more manageable 100,000 square feet per mechanic if you had 15 mechanics.
Okay, so that was the rationale. And the only other question, I think you've answered it already. The best system would have these maintenance mechanics doing 40 to 50% of preventive maintenance on their daily schedules.
Yes.
Okay.
But you're not there yet. I mean, clearly you'd have to phase into that.
Right, we're at 7 and 10% or something like that. You said. Okay.
You've got a ways to go.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Simon.
Just to clarify, there's preventive maintenance work, which is, and their work orders, are those different?
They would be placed on work orders. I think the way it happens.
But there's work orders that are other than preventive maintenance.
Oh, clearly, yes. There's.
So do we keep pace with our work? One, do we have a system that generates work orders for all the required preventive maintenance?
In the town, my understanding is that you do. In the Board of Education, that is a work in process.
That's something they're aiming to
Yes,
achieve.
yes.
Do we,
And they're making good strides, by the way.
so they have a plan to do it by a certain date?
Well, I don't. If there is a date, I'm not aware of it. Well, actually, I do recall it was like July 1st of this year. And since I haven't been back.
So the goal is that starting this month, they're going to be generating work orders for the preventive.
That was the objective, yeah.
So then next question is, do we execute all of our work orders? Do we have a backlog?
I think there's a number of ways to answer that, Mr. Simon. We did not go through, there's apparently several thousand, or at least several hundred, work orders in your school dude system, which is the management information system used by the schools. And Ms. Trapouris and her staff have kind of taken on yeoman's work to go through each and every one of those to determine whether or not they are still legitimate open work orders. My strong guess is with the numbers that we heard, only a fraction of those are still open. So I'd have to say at this point, well, at least in the most recent past, there hasn't been a great effort to clear those work orders. So I would have to say, no, there has not been a good system for.
What about it? But there's no indication that there's work orders that are not getting accomplished.
There's no obvious indication of that.
And on the town side,
I would have to say that's less of an issue.
the town is getting.
Because they've got a bit more of a mature information system. That's not to say it's a better information system. It's just they've been using the same information system longer than the school has, so that those types of issues aren't as acute as
So
they
you're
are in the school
recommending
system.
that we go to the school dude system?
We do.
Okay.
Yes, we do. Although that's one of those fungible recommendations.
So I just want to
that-
make sure I understand that your recommendation to add more building mechanics, who I assume would do the work orders, based upon no observable evidence that we have a backlog of work orders not done, is based upon statistical analysis of other cities in general.
Well, yes, but having said that, there's no obvious evidence that you've got a backlog. Clearly, you've got a backlog. What percentage of that is true? I can't answer
So,
that.
but we
I'm not
should-
sure anyone here could.
But that would be helpful to know.
It
Because one of the
would have been for me, yes.
Because at least one of the motivations I had for the study was if we have a backlog and we have the ability to shift fungible resources across multiple entities, that would be an advantage. If we don't have a backlog and everything seems to be getting done, there's less imperative to do that. If in fact the Board of Ed is not issuing work orders for preventive maintenance and not doing preventive maintenance, that's a bigger concern that we should then also determine.
That's the key. And I would say that the issue may not be as acute if all you're attempting to do as a facilities maintenance operation is to respond to emergency work orders. Clearly, there's another dimension
Well,
to
we're
this.
going to find that out.
Yeah.
Then the last question, the other question is, it seemed to me that there were some specialized skills across all buildings, like we would have people that are specialized in HVAC or air conditioning instrumentation or boilers, or certain skill sets that we could use across all of our facilities that would be very expensive and difficult to buy for one or the other. And do you see evidence of our ability to leverage that particular expertise?
Yes, particularly with your instrumentation mechanics, who are possess more expertise than your typical building maintenance mechanic here.
And that if we had to, and if they were in short supply and we couldn't find them, then we could then try a consolidation in certain areas of where there's a shortage of expertise.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. I thought the report was nicely done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question about the nature of our buildings. On your slide number 4, when your operational characteristics slide, you indicate and show that we have 18 Board of Ed buildings and 131 town buildings. In your experience, does the number of town buildings that we have in Greenwich seem similar to other towns, or are we higher, are we lower? I mean, and again, I ask that question because some of the statements and conclusions you made about efficiency and custodians and mechanics per square footage, I mean, we have a lot of very small buildings, certainly in the town side, and a lot of them are subject to seasonal use. And I just wonder how that factored into some of the conclusions that you reached.
Let me answer that in a couple of ways. One is that this 131 eliminates many of what you're referring to as those really small seasonal buildings. These are, the 131 here, is my understanding, and keep in mind, I didn't walk to every one of these, so I can't really verify this, but my understanding is that these 131 are those which the town routinely maintains. Now, they're varying levels, they're varying sizes, obviously, and they've got varying systems within each one of them. But 131 it's high. Certainly the total number is very high, in my experience, for a town this size.
I mean, I would imagine, Al, and you could probably respond, I would think that in the 131, we have a number of bathroom facilities that at Parks facilities. We have some of the buildings at the Todd's Point, which are clearly only used during the season that's opened. So
Those are
level of maintenance and systems in some of those buildings are clearly a lot different than systems and maintenance levels at, say, the public safety complex, this building.
There's no argument there. However, bathroom facilities and parks can be one of your biggest time consumers in terms of where your building maintenance mechanics are spending their time. Shall I yield?
First, I want to thank you for letting me speak tonight, and being part of the steering committee. Appreciated working with Robin and Matrix. I think that they did a good job of gathering the facts, and I think the steering committee, as Mr. Raymer indicated before, needs to meet again to talk about some of these assumptions. I look at this report, and clearly what comes across is that both Board of Ed and the town are understaffed in the maintenance area, that we've been doing a very good job of keeping up and maintaining our buildings and doing some preventive maintenance, but there's more opportunity for improvement. But what I struggle with is that the discussion and the presentation, the recommendations of flexibility in our organization if we merge, but how to be flexible when you're understaffed. And I think that the challenges of the missions of the organizations are not very well reflected in the report, and the spans of control and the scope and the strategies of the organization. So I think that the steering committee needs to work through the operational issues and to understand that organizational strategy versus the implementation kind of approach for this kind of recommendation. I also think it was really telling that there isn't another district in Connecticut that has merged the organizations, that there are only 4 districts mentioned in the report that they went to, and a few of these, I think the background of one of them was it's more than 20 years old, so it wasn't a recent integration of organization. It's just the way the town did it from a long time ago. So you can't go back to understand what their motivation was to merge, but there isn't a lot of history here, and I think we all need to ask an awful lot of questions before we try and break ground in a new area like this.
Thank you. Are there any other, Mr. Pellegrino?
Sorry, your comments give me a couple of questions now for Robin, please. You say there's only 4 other school districts, towns that have combined. Is that just in Connecticut, or did you look beyond Connecticut?
There are none that we found in Connecticut.
I'm
We found
asking you if you
4.
looked beyond Connecticut. Did you look at New York State, Massachusetts, New Jersey?
Well, the ones that we presented to you were Massachusetts.
Okay.
Danvers, Needham, and Lexington.
How wide did you go in terms of looking
How
for combined facilities?
How long did we look?
No.
I'm sorry.
How broadly?
You looked in all of New England.
All of New England?
No, we didn't. And,
Did not.
I feel like I'm kind of getting into waters here where I didn't intend to tread, because keep in mind, this was not part of our scope to do this. We thought it might be useful information to you to have, so we thought it might enrich the report. So this was not an extensive look. Now, having said that, we didn't find any in Connecticut. That doesn't mean there aren't any in Connecticut. And in fact, we were the firm last year that conducted a similar study in the town of Avon that recommended the consolidation of the Board of Education and town facilities and grounds maintenance, as well as certain other administrative services that were included in the report. I don't think they've gotten around to doing that yet. It's been a fairly fresh study.
Okay. My second question, I guess, goes to, you use this benchmark of 55,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
And I would enjoy or appreciate a better understanding of where and how is that benchmark derived? What is that benchmark? And I may maybe tie that into page 6 of what you just presented, because if I'm looking at this, I think I'm looking at the square footage per maintenance tech. Says 103,000 for Greenwich, but it says 200,000 for Danvers and 300,000 for Needham. So I would welcome a better understanding of what is the benchmark you're using, how did you derive it, and how do I understand it in terms of your recommendation?
Well, I want to put a caveat on these numbers. Again, we took their word for it. And in many cases, when you do a phone interview like this and you haven't called to prepare your interviewee on the phone for anything, you get what you get. And these people were probably hurried. I did not conduct this. My cohort, Susanna, did. But you get people that tell you what they think, and it might not necessarily be true. Now, with that said, how is the 55,000? Well, it's not derived. It is our observation, not our observation, and in many well-functioning operations, in facilities maintenance operations around the country, doing this for, well, I've been doing it for 20 years, and we've got folks in our organization that have been doing it longer than I. And that's been our experience in well-managed organizations. There's no derivation to it, but even outside of our organization, that is a fairly standard number. 50 to 60,000 square feet per maintenance mechanic is a fairly standard number. And I'll be happy to put that into the next version of the report if you'd like some substantiation.
But then how do I understand these numbers if they're saying that Needham has 300,000 square feet for maintenance tech?
That's huge. I mean, they weren't my client. Again, I have to say that if I had to guess, I'd say that's probably not right. We reported to you here what they told us.
Okay.
I mean, I can't imagine that they're getting anything other than just the wildest emergencies done at 300,000 square feet per mechanic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions or comments? Okay. So first, thank you for your report. As I indicated, this is just one more step in this long process for us. I will respectfully disagree with my colleague, Mr. Raymer. I think the process is going well, has gone well, and will continue to trend in the right direction. I think this is a good dialogue to have in the public. It's taxpayer money that's paying for your good services. It's taxpayer money that's going to ultimately pay for these building maintenance programs, and whether or not we consolidate or add individuals, it's going to be used by taxpayer money. I think a discussion like this out in the open with your sort of raw report is healthy, and that type of discussion is what this town needs more of. And so I think this evening highlights that point. That being said, we will, I think the steering committee needs to, is to define itself going forward. This all falls on us, not on, obviously on you. We need to make sure we have things like voting membership and the difference between policymakers versus staff. And we hope to use your final report and then take it. Certainly there's a report from our building superintendent that's still out there. That's a useful tool as well for us. And then, as I said, hopefully have some recommendation to make to our budget committee, which will be needed by February. But clearly no decision is being made tonight, but simply having a dialogue with what your observations were. Mr. Mynarski, because you're the interface. So we should probably keep a tight deadline on this, and then because once August hits, then we lose a lot of people. And so why don't we say within the next week, any comments or questions, but definitely by next Monday, get them into Mr. Mynarski. He'll filter them like he normally does. Filter might be the wrong term. Consolidate them, and then forward them on so that a final report can be issued. And in the meantime, we'll also work on developing a committee. I won't call it a steering committee, but a committee to work on the recommendations, both from you, the report from Mr. Minnelli, so that we can move this process forward. Mr. Mynarski, and then Mr. Creary, you wanted to make some comments.
Just to follow up on that, the Board of Education had the opportunity to respond. Do you want to give the town the same opportunity along with the BET in the next week?
The town always has the same, I mean, they have the report, they have a week, to get this in. I mean, ultimately, one of the things I'm trying to avoid, though, too, is the difference between having an opinion about what's in the report factually as opposed to what one's opinion is. The taxpayers didn't pay for this report simply to get what our opinion is on the topic. We're looking, when we've paid for, the opinion of the consultants. And so I think that distinction needs to be made, and I think the consultants are astute enough to make that differentiation. Mr. Creary.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind you of Mr. Minnelli's report. I know it's about a year since he issued it. It was a joint report that we put together with Sue Wallerstein, Tony Byrne, myself, Amy Siebert, and primarily Alan Minnelli, who did 99% of the work. But if you look at that and compare it with the report that we just heard, or the draft report, you'll see many elements that are very, very similar, including the cultural issues between the school and the town, the labor relations issues, which are quite complex and very difficult to resolve. I think also you'll see in his report, he recommended that we were going to need to spend, not save any monies on this project, but probably spend in the neighborhood of about $500,000 more to really get this new department, if that's the direction we go, up to the level where we provide this level of services that we think is appropriate for the town of Greenwich for the long term. So there's a lot of similarities if you look at both reports, and I think it would be well worth reviewing it and just taking another look at it. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if we have it. Do we have it in yeah, we have it in electronic format, right? Yeah, we can email it. It's about 40, 50 pages long. It's not a small one also. Okay.
For further questions or comments? Okay. If there are none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, and I wish everybody a healthy and safe remainder this summer season. Mr. Kelly? Motion to adjourn. So moved.